Hey, it's Jose Galison, and this is No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel. You can also find me on all the major podcatchers and on Odyssey as well. Today, my guest is Marcel Goutreau, or online you'll see him mostly as Marcel Dumas. This is a live stream if you're here on the 29th, and I do these public, but I normally don't announce them. And I immediately after the fact, I will put this as private or enlisted or whatever, and then it'll basically be only accessible to my patrons. So if you would like to have access to that, and I'll release it like a week later as like a numbered episode. So if you'd like to have access to that, patreon.com/just no way Jose 2020. The lowest level is $2, the highest level is 20. And then the $20 levels for sponsors, and I list them off every episode. So for my sponsors, I have CD McRae of the Whiskey and Tea podcast. Definitely go check her out. She's good stuff. At SpaceCat2K on Twitter. I just had him on not too long ago. We did like an agorism versus secession type thing, or versus in quotes, because I don't really see it as a versus thing. And we talked in that because the $10 level gets you you get to curate an episode, and as that he picked that topic, and he came on and we talked about it. I have Jacob Winograd of the Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy podcast, and he's been on here multiple times. He's good stuff. Just to give you guys a little updates on what's going on. Tomorrow, for Tower Power Hour, we have Dave Smith on. So that should be a big one. If you're watching this when it comes out as a numbered episode, it'll already be out. But if you're watching as a live stream, obviously, go check that out tomorrow. I also just recently recorded with Clint of Liberty Lockdown, one of the other hosts of Tower Power Hour. And it should be dropping actually the same day as the Tower Power Hour. So tomorrow, the 30th. So definitely go check all that stuff out. We had a really good conversation. It was kind of like a mix between like our serious episodes and Tower Power Hours. A little bit on the smart side, but we still goofed off a little bit. And also make sure to go check out TopLobsta at toplobsta.com. Use Jose at checkout for 10% off. As you guys know, I've been telling you, all the Tower Power Hour guys, all of our shows, Natural Capitalist, fucking Liberty Lockdown, and then also Josh's show. Obviously, he's been doing that for a while to break the cycle. We're all kind of partnered with him, so you help out TopLobsta, you help out us as well. We're all kind of work together. If you go to his site, you'll see we're listed right at the top. You see like little hyperlinks, all that stuff. He redid the website recently. It looks really good. Go check it out. There's a lot of merch. And obviously, I prefer you get my merch because I get that kickback. But whenever you don't, there's plenty of other good merch you can get. Definitely go support the homie. With that, let's go ahead and bring on Marcel. What's up, dude?
I'm doing pretty well. Glad to be on.
Yeah, awesome. I saw you making funny faces at my intro. I get mixed results. I like seeing because I can see you.
I like the multiple tiers of paywall that was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was talking about like the intro, but yeah, I don't know. I gotta fucking hawk my wares, man. But yeah, I was talking about like the intro, the beginning. It is always funny. I can always see the faces at the bottom. It's always funny seeing the different reactions. But go ahead and introduce yourself for the audience so they know who you are, what you're about.
Sure. So my name is Marcel Goutreau. I am a PhD candidate now at George Mason University, and I've been a summer fellow at the Meet Institute for a few years running. So I'm, feet straddled firmly between heaven and earth on that one. My main areas of research are Austrian economics, development economics, and public choice economics. So I read about and write about how poor countries spend tax money poorly.
Cool.
My main areas of interest are, let's say, the Middle East, U.S. foreign policy in general, the history of the American right, that kind of thing. It's broadly what I'm interested in. Awesome. And of course, libertarian sci-fi from the 90s, right?
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you? I'm just curious because I know you're in college, and I don't know if you were a little bit older or not.
26 years old.
Okay, cool. So you're a little bit on the other side. I was just wondering because I'm always jealous when I meet these like young guys like Drew Hancock. They're like I'm only 30, so I'm not like super old. So I didn't know if you were like 22, 23. I don't know how, but I'm always jealous when I find these younger guys that had their shit together, somewhat, at least on the right track. Anyways, I want to bring up just kind of a lighthearted note to begin with. I thought it was fucking genius. Like I watched one of your, I forget what was the name of your show? I watched.
My show is The Moral Minority.
The Moral Minority. I couldn't remember. I knew I had minority in there, but I watched that and I listened to the episode. And the funniest thing is, like, even though it was a really good episode, the thing that stuck out to me the most, that was the most like blew my mind, is you guys had your little bit about Trump. and how his locker room talk doesn't make any fucking sense. And it was like a light bulb in my head. I was like, oh my God. Like, and it's not to say that he's never had sex or banged porn stars or anything, but it's like, I could see those things being true, but him also having a weird upbringing and not really having these guy friends that he like actually, bumps elbows with, and like, so now he's always tried to put on that persona, and so that's why you get these weird clunky euphemisms he uses for like,
I moved on her like a bitch, and then I grabbed her by the pussy. If you think about it for another few seconds, it's like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's funny, but like when I heard it at first, it was funny because it was out of the norm. So it's like it was more funny because just like, who phrases it like that?
You'd almost think he spoke English as a second language, actually.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I just thought that was weirdly genius. I definitely suggest go check out your show. It was hilarious, you guys' bit on that, because it weirdly was a light bulb. I'm not even being like facetious. Like, I would legit was like, oh my God, that explains a lot about the psyche of Trump. That like that because of his upbringing and like he has to put on the persona. I mean, obviously it shows out when he's trying to like, talk with the dudes or whatever, but it does also have other explanatory power for other aspects of his personality. You're like, oh shit, like he's that guy that's trying to like put on a persona essentially to some extent. But
yeah,
I don't know. I thought that was interesting. But all right, anyways, you recently started a Twitter shitstorm, and it was over the homeless thing, or it was kind of the late Rothbard, which is the best Rothbard in my opinion, where he, what was the line? He's like, unleash the cops, and it's like, I know the two main lines I always remember.
Police must be unleashed and allowed to administer immediate punishment, instant punishment, something like that. Subject, of course, to liability when they are in error. And then there's another, I think it might be the same paragraph. Clear the streets of the bums. Where will they go? Who cares? Hopefully into the ranks of the productive. Yeah, it was very, very super villainous.
Yeah, I love that line. Who cares?
Who cares? Yeah.
But yeah, and then a subject, of course, to liability, which everyone likes to forget about that part. And then people go, oh, the cops they never have liability. Yeah, well, that's kind of the point. Like, these things need to work for both these things for this to work.
And it's a weird thing too, because some people, like, even as you said it, I kind of thought to myself, yeah, as if some vagrant's going to have some lawyer to sue the police department. And then I thought about it, I was like, wait a minute, there's like legions and legions of shitlib NGOs chomping at the bit to sue the local police department on behalf of some vagrant. Like, they'll be fine. Although will these NGOs exist during Ancapistan? Maybe not.
I mean, probably. I mean, I'm sure that the market provides. I mean, I guess
everything would be an NGO.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be somebody out there. I mean, I don't know that deep a theory. I'd probably need Bob Murphy to explain that one for me. But I mean, yeah. And we were talking a little bit in the pre, and I talked about this recently in a show, and I actually completely agreed with kind of your take, and like in that, yeah, like I'm fine with that. I'm completely fine with if I'm at a public playground and there's some bum. I mean, it's one thing if a bum is sitting there, politely. I can even tell he's a bum. He's reading a newspaper. That's one thing. But if he's over there being a nuisance, that's a different story. And, you can use your interpretation of what a nuisance is. I mean, everyone always uses the example of them jerking off or something, especially because there was that fucking video recently of the guy on the subway that made the rounds on Twitter jerking off in, I think, like New York or some shit. And
that sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, and like, I guess you could get into really autistic territory and be like, does this really break the NAP? Does it not? It's kind of like, to some extent, I kind of don't care, because if we were in magical Ancapistan, there's no way that would be okay. And every one of us realizes this. That person would get kicked out. Like, if this is private property, they'd be out. And we were talking before, and I don't really have a consistent theory in how that works out. If like so far as like private property, public property, whatever. But at the same time, like I'm kind of like root a lot of my thinking in egoism. And while I always do try to get consistent theory, if I'm in a place where I'm like, this is against, because like I know if I had a public park near my house and that was happening, I wouldn't be like, well, this goes against my libertarian principles. Like, no, I'm fucking calling the cops. Like, I like that's in like, because it's against my very interest, my family's interest, and that's kind of where my first principles lie from. And if I can't make those things square, it's kind of like, I probably need to think about it some more. But at the end of the day, I lean towards, my personal, like, my family incentives. And so I'm kind of curious your thoughts on the matter and how you think about this and how that is consistent with libertarian theory or whatever, if it is at all, or if you even care if it does, kind of like where I'm coming from.
I definitely do. So first on the meta level, I definitely, well, I don't know. I probably haven't been tested strongly enough by reality, but I'd like to think that I'd be willing to make some sacrifices on the personal level to be morally consistent. Arguably, just reputationally, I have. And then on the object level, it totally is compatible with normal Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism, where if you just have the idea that everything the state has is stolen from taxpayers, even that which it builds was built with stolen goods. We know who they were because the state keeps records of the taxation. Everybody's living there. There's no mystery, right? You know, things the government takes, it's very rarely where it's like, man, we got to find the original guy. Like, the government's right there. We're all living here. I mean, I guess it's possible that, you know, and it probably happens very often, the government taxes people, those people move away, and then, you know, a bunch of new people move into the area, and then there's some kind of question about, well, technically, you know, it's not the locals of this neighborhood, but actually everybody who built this neighborhood actually left and fled into the suburbs in the 1970s, so actually technically they should still have, right, they're the rightful claimant. So there might be a mystery along those lines, but notice that moves us in a far more right-wing direction than even I was suggesting, right, where suburbanites actually maintain a prior claim on the public goods of the cities. But the people who are victims of a protection racket have the right to demand protection. If the government takes your money and says it's for this purpose, you have the right on the first order to, I mean, it's your property. You can demand anything be done with it, right? And if they're saying, well, we're putting it towards protection, it's like, all right, well, I was going to use it to buy a new suit, opportunity cost or whatever, but if that's not in the cards, I'm not getting a refund, then I would like to get the protection that I was promised. And in the same way, you know, a public park, right? I mean, this is money that was taken, you know, a lot of people, and even if, whether it was stolen or not, actually, because I'm even being too charitable, you know, in many places, these parks were, so to speak, nationalized, right? These were things that maybe a church built or some other community organization built, and through one mechanism or another, it found itself in control. That's still stealing, right? But even whether it was constructed with stolen property or it was built and then stolen, the locals, the people who contributed in the past or contribute in the present to it, have the right to dictate how it's used. Right. And liberals will be constantly trying to fight against this. I think Walter Block talks about this in relation to public libraries, although which is weird because, as I recall, Walter Block is relatively on the open border side of these sorts of discussions. But even he, when discussing public libraries, says, like, you know, if the money is taken from you to build this library, there's no obligation to let it become like a den of cocaine usage.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that my question then would be, if you're going, it's kind of like the people in the community, wouldn't it be kind of this, I guess, to use a dirty word, a democratized type thing to where, I mean, would you really be able to, on the individual level, make your demands? Because it would be, if it's the public park, it's the whole idea of the tragedy of the commons. It's like, how do I get to dictate that, you know, so-and-so shouldn't be here because they're being a nuisance or whatever? You know, the homeless guy is the example where, you know, but most people were focused on. And I don't know if I said it here, if this was in pre, but like, I mean, obviously, like, I personally would have no issue with a homeless guy that's just, you know, politely sitting there, you know, reading a book or some shit or whatever, you know. But like, now if he's like masturbating or something like ridiculous, you know, or if he's sprawled out on the bench with a newspaper blanket, I don't know if that's necessarily what I want my kids to see. And it's not to say that I don't want them to exist, or that I would, like, if there was some like national park or whatever and they were out in the woods with a tent, I wouldn't give a shit because they're not affecting me at all. But now the question becomes, like, do I, on an individual level, am I allowed to, or not allowed, is it proper through libertarian theory or whatever to be like, get this guy the fuck out? Like, I mean, personally, like I kind of said, I think libertarian theory is the ideal theory, but at the end of the day, if I'm in a spot where I can't figure out the theory and I'm in a spot where, you know, it's unclear and I know my incentives, I know where I'm going to go. And I don't want that to be something that's around my family. I mean, I have 2 young daughters. That would not be something I would want at my public park. So I guess it's, to me, I guess I'm a little bit, it's murky in a libertarian theory sense if I get to dictate that person doesn't get to be there, because this is something that, you know, everyone has been stolen for to have, you know what I mean? Or I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if it's still just as murky for you.
I mean, I guess there's certain the murkiness really is just in, you know, since there's multiple victims and the stuff has been kind of mixed together, what is the right decision making capacity? And it's one of those things where I say, you know, the reason crime is bad is because it makes us worse off, right? There's no way once a crime has happened to make everybody perfectly whole, right? Sometimes you put people in situations where they have to act in an unethical way just to be made whole. You know, one that comes to mind is, like, as a historical example, you know, during World War II, Germans were expelling, you know, Poles and all sorts of other, not just Jews, but all other Eastern European ethnic groups, and moving Germans in. And it's a violation of Geneva Conventions to do that sort of thing, to expel people from their homes and then move in your own civilians. And then after the war ended, there was kind of a problem. Now it's like, well, what do we do with all these German civilians who are living in either what is now Poland or what we're going to give to Poland? And in the final accounting, Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill just collaborated to just, you know, expel them at gunpoint back into, not even into Germany, but like deeper into the new, smaller Germany. And whatever you say about that, I think on some levels that wasn't ethical. But we should understand one of the reasons why population transfer is against Geneva Conventions is because after the fact, it puts us all in that sort of situation where the only people who can give anything that looks like justice are Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. And as far as I'm concerned, if you put me in that situation, you deserve to die.
Yeah, I mean, I know this similar situation was South Africa as well. I know they did this shit with the farmers where they booted. I forget which, because they've swapped back and forth between like having the blacks and the whites in charge, and they've kicked one out and they've controlled the farms, and the other one comes in and now they control the farms, and it's this weird like who gets what. Like, yeah, this was stolen from your grandfathers forever ago, but it's like, what moral claim do you have? And it does get into, I know, I guess it is. I guess to me it's still a weird murky territory. And I guess I also too, like you brought up crime, like it not even necessarily is a crime what I'm speaking of too, with like a homeless person sleeping on the bench with a newspaper blanket, or just being belligerent or whatever, or, you know, you kind of brought borders. It's the same problem with the borders. It's kind of like I'm more like what's the word I'm looking for? Apathetic, sort of, on the border situation. I'm not really open borders or closed borders. I lean more towards closed, sort of, but like and it's for the similar reason. It's a lot of like the Hoppian type arguments and stuff, and like I'm more lean that way. But it's the kind of same idea. Necessarily crossing a border isn't really a crime, but at the same time, we all understand that if we were in a magical Encapistan, we would have private borders, and it's like, but we're in a situation where we don't, and it's kind of like, well, I mean, do we want the government to some extent sort of behave like a private thing to some extent? You know, it's the same idea with, you know, to bring up Papa again, with like monarchies, in which they're more like, they're not necessarily private property like set up, but it's similar, and that's kind of why it's superior, and it's the same idea. I don't know. I guess if you have any thoughts on that, I kind of wondering. It just seems like it's murky altogether, and it's kind of hard to find a clear. I don't know. It's just such a weird, gray, murky area, in my opinion, when it comes to theory, when it comes to tragedy of the commons, and especially something that's not even necessarily a crime. If it's something that's a clear, breaking of the NAP, that's easy for us. We're like, well, it's not even a matter of tragedy of the commons, just get him the fuck out. Like, I mean, it's a crime. But
I would say, but it's where we recognize where the murkiness is. The murkiness is for those who do have the right to decide between each other what is the right way to make a decision, right? So when we're talking about the park, when we're talking about the border, it's not that everybody has the right side. We first recognize that only net taxpayers, property owners, exactly right, they internally are the sole claimants on this decision-making process. And then, if they are at cross purposes, then what is an ethical way to resolve it? And that's one of those things that I think will just have to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis between those claimants, right? And so, like, we could draw certain hard boundaries. Just if I've been stolen from to have a police system, and you've been stolen from to have a police system, and I believe in the death penalty and you don't, there's a valid dispute to be had in which we can each sort of say, where I can't unilaterally impose a will on you, but if I say, since I've already been stolen from, I'd like to increase the police budget for even more police protection than I would have gotten, then I definitely can't make that kind of claim, because now I'm just making the case for more theft. But it's still but who definitely doesn't get a vote? The vagrant, or the vote, or the lot, or a lottery ticket, or to get the talking stick or the medicine. It's just those who have the right. So even that murkiness is like a practical problem. You know what I mean? It's not an ethical one.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's still, I guess it is one of those spots. I still find it murky, but it's, I definitely agree with you mostly. It's just I'm trying to find a way to square it to be like, here's the theory. And I guess the next point that kind of goes into, what are your thoughts on utilizing state power? We talked about this a little in I think I know where you're going to go, but this kind of ties into this as well, because I know a lot of people's argument there was like, oh, we're going to use the police. And it's like, yeah. In my opinion, it's like, yeah, I mean, they've kind of monopolized the fucking protection. So, I mean, I don't really have another option. So I would prefer there to be anarcho cops out there, but there fucking aren't. So I don't know what you want me to do. So,
yeah, it's when people say like, oh, you're going to use state power to get what you want. Like, yeah, that's what it's for. Someone's going to do it. Like the entire reason the state exists is because force is being used by someone to get what they want. And it's not going to be, for as long as the state is there, it's not going to be nobody. So it might as well be me. Right.
Yeah.
And, Jose, you might say, well, no, actually, I want it to be me. It's like, no, you're wrong. It's going to be me. Right. It's never going to be nobody. While the state exists, it has to be somebody. And if, our enemies are putting us in this us or them situation, they do that. I'm going to sit on my thumbs, being stabbed or harassed. And it's like, well, I wouldn't want to betray my anarchist principles by calling the cops on this. I mean, it wouldn't even be, to even say it would be a betrayal of anarchist principles is ridiculous.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it was one of those things when people were I saw people make multiple people. It's almost like a straw man to bring it up until you see people make the argument. Because I can't tell you how many people made the argument like, well, just go take care of it yourself. And you're like, you want me to go with my kid, go beat the shit out of a homeless guy and kick him out of a park? Like, I mean, even if I didn't have my kid, it's like, well, now I'm putting myself at the whims of, having to get fucked by state power. So
yeah, it's a weird it's like tactical localism. And I haven't yet decided if it's hypocritical or not. Definitely it is partially a thing among libertarians, I think, just because there's because of the coalition that we started to build, there's an anti-urbanite streak here where a lot of people have sort of like, founding fathers, cowboy, libertarian, Mormon homestead fantasies where they're like, I'm going to grow my own food and I'm not going to live in the pot. I'm not going to eat bugs or whatever. It's like, listen, we're doing division of labor here, right? Like I don't grow my own food. I've never once killed an animal for somebody else to eat. I never pulled a plant out of the ground for somebody else to eat. I don't plan on doing that for my entire life. And I don't ever plan on being solely in charge of my own defense, right? Any more than I would represent myself in court. There's a billion and one things every day that I don't do for myself, right? Someone else gets paid money to do it. Pretty much the only thing I do for myself is I educate myself, right? And that's because I'm training to educate others. But so this idea that we're going to say, actually, I don't want to be in charge of my own defense, or the idea that I don't want to delegate my own defense. You got to do it yourself to be a real man. It's like, no. Right, that's savagery. That's barbarism.
Which, I mean, I would make the case that if you want to do that, go right ahead. But I think it's, generally speaking, depending on the situation, probably kind of dumb, especially in the context we're speaking of. But if you want to, go for it. It's kind of the same idea with, I bring this situation up a lot of times to, like, I don't know, say, for example, a cop pulls you over and you did nothing wrong, and he tries to, like, tries to arrest you. Technically, he's kidnapping you. If you want to fight him, I think you're fully within your moral rights to do so. Do I think it's smart? No. like, you're probably gonna have a really bad day. It's probably not gonna work out well for you. I would suggest you don't, but more power to you, brother.
No, when you're in court, what you do is you point out that the flag at the courthouse has golden fringes, and so actually you're like what is it? You're an Article 5 free traveler. They can't even touch you. They have no jurisdiction. This is a naval court.
Yeah. All right. Now I want to kind of hear. I've listened to you. I mean, the reason why I contacted you in the first place, I heard you in a few places. I saw obviously the tweet. The tweet. I mean, so I noticed an interesting way of thought that you have, and I'm just kind of curious what your inspirations, like where you've derived your thought patterns from. Like, because I mean, I brought up egoism, so Stirner. I mean, I consider myself an agorist, so Konkin. Like, I obviously am very inspired by Rothbard, like Hoppe, like. So I'm kind of interested, like, where you're coming from, and then I also I heard Pete made a comment on when you were in his show about NRX. I'm kind of curious where that's coming from. Like, I don't know if you're NRX sympathetic or if you're a fan of NRX. I find some of their thoughts kind of interesting. I mean, I don't really go full bore, but I haven't really done a deep dive, but I do find some of their stuff pretty interesting. So I'm kind of curious where you're coming from.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say I identify as NRX. Although, like you, I'd say I read some of their stuff. I find some of it interesting, but it's definitely not how I would describe myself. I'm a pretty orthodox Rothbardian. My path is one that's probably been pretty well trod. Where so originally, for all I talk about, like, former leftists, I actually was like a really kind of a Democrat when I was like 8 years old, right? But I got into Ron Paul a little bit in 2008, and then heavily in 2012. He got screwed over during the Republican primary that year, and then just it was like Adam Kokesh videos or Larkin Rose and like the kind of free Keene people who were like, actually, instead of jumping to Gary Johnson, you should be an anarchist. I took very little convincing, actually. They just kind of like, taxation is theft. And I was like, wow. I was like mind blown. I was maybe 14 or 15 years old. I was like, I can't believe I've been lied to all this time. It is stealing, because if you say no, they hurt you. So that was definitely how I got to these kinds of, to this world of politics. And then from there, I guess the thing that made me an anarchist was it was like the thing that convinced me of anarchism practically was Stefan Molyneux's Practical Anarchy. And then from there it was David Friedman's Machinery of Freedom. And from there it was, back to the Mises Institute and those circles and just reading like that.
Okay, well, maybe that's it, because I was trying to identify something that might be a little bit different, because I did notice you have a unique way of thinking. I think you're a little bit
So I've been told.
A little bit more of an out of the box thinker. So maybe it's the Friedman things. I feel like a lot of people don't do the Friedman, because Friedman is known for being a more utilitarian, and I actually kind of am a little bit more sympathetic to his arguments, and I actually, that in a weird way is kind of derived from the egoism thing, which I talked to before, where it's like it's kind of like, if it doesn't work for me, it's kind of like, well, what use is this? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I don't think I'm a utilitarian. I think the thing that just got me for Friedman rather than Rothbard on that one was just Friedman's description of a private law system was just a little bit less clumsy. Because actually in For New Liberty, when Rothbard describes a private law system, he kind of does the thing that I was talking about before, where it's like, oh yeah, in Ancapistan, like you would be doing the detective work to find out who stole your TV and such, like, or you would be doing these contracts. Like, I don't want to do any of that. And then David Friedman has kind of just described like the network of like, here's who you would pay and here's who they would pay and here's how. And so I just found that to be a little bit more compelling in the end.
Okay, I figured maybe that was it, because, like I said, the utilitarianism, it always gets a bad rap, utilitarianism, but then I feel like when everyone ever describes it, when they're saying why it's bad, they're always giving like a really stupid version of utilitarianism, because they'll use the argument of like, I know Dave uses this argument, I'm not just trying to shit on Dave at all, Dave Smith. I know he uses the argument of like, like the idea of that, like, oh, well, if we took a person and we cut them open and, like we could use their organs to give them to other people, it's like, well, you just saved so many people. And it's like, well, that's better for the greater good. And it's like, well, that's actually not a good utilitarian argument, because you just set a precedent of this is okay to do, and that's not going to work out well in a utilitarian sense either. So you kind of almost have to think at another level. And I didn't even get into Friedman until I started doing my Anarchist Handbook series I'm doing, and I did appreciate him for that, because my perspective is very much like, I mean, cool, the moral argument's great and all, but at the same time, if you're making a moral argument, but it's like, but this doesn't work, it's kind of like, well, what's the fucking point? Like, cool, you just found some cool moral theory. I guess that's the kind of way I look at it. I mean, I guess maybe you do or don't. But I don't know. I guess maybe it's just you. Maybe you're just a unique guy. I just figured maybe you had some unique inspirations.
No, I think it's just. I was going to say maybe it's just the autism, but we're libertarians, so that can't be it either.
Yeah. All right, cool. You said when I was in the DMs, you were talking about you are well. Like, you brought up Anarcho-Tyranny, and so I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that, on what it is. We've heard a little bit about it before. It's always kind of moderately interested me, or looked into it too much. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts on Anarcho-Tyranny, and yeah.
All right. So
vaguely.
quick survey, just or survey of it for your viewers, just in case they don't know. So Anarcho-Tyranny is a concept that was pioneered by Sam Francis, and I think it was in Chronicles magazine, where he observed what he was discussing the fact that basically it's anarchy for the mob, they get to do what they want, and tyranny for you. And I don't remember what example he used, but whatever example he used, the example just became the LA riots, where we saw this spectacle of, a lot of people speaking the voice of the unheard, mainly at Koreatown, and very few of them got arrested. Billions of dollars in property were destroyed. Meanwhile, California was still enforcing its 5 or 10 day waiting period on gun purchases. So that's just a very quick description of Anarcho-Tyranny, or you could just
give a better modern day example.
Yeah, Kyle Rittenhouse would be, or we can make plenty of, all the George Floyd stuff where people are allowed to freely loot, destroy, burn, and then if you defend yourself, then you get a malicious prosecutor who screws you over. And there are a few ways people try to explain this, and there's sort of one base level one, which is I guess the most comforting one is people say, well, law-abiding citizens have names and addresses, and so it's kind of easy to just spot you, and you'd be kind of stupid not to. I don't think that this explanation holds too much water these days, because we live in the world of the total surveillance state, right? Everybody's carrying cell phones now. We even saw that in the Rittenhouse trial, the FBI had drones overhead. They were watching everybody. You could ping people's phones, find out who anybody is. So it's not a matter of the police just being, kind of just lazy Keystone cops, right? I mean, we are dealing with a sort of a malicious situation here, where there's an active. I'm not even sure I want to say R2s have been captured. I think kind of from the beginning, the FBI has always been the militant wing of a particular kind of bootlicker, we'll say. But I'd say those are my broad thoughts on Anarcho-Tyranny. I favor more malicious-based explanations than sort of rational choice explanations.
Okay, cool. All right, let's move on to. I kind of want to hear your thoughts, and I guess parallel these two things. You brought up that you're. I'll be honest. I've said before I'm awful at history because I went to public school and it was always super boring, and it was always just memorize names and dates. And as I've gotten older, I've learned to like it more, and I find it very interesting. But I kind of have that gap, and I've been more of a fan of theory and current events, so I've been lacking in the history department. So I mean. And you brought up that you're a big fan of the old right. That's something you've looked into a lot. And I kind of wanted to see if we could compare and contrast that between the current state of the Republican Party, which I can definitely talk on a little bit more. The old right is definitely where I have a little bit of a blank spot. I have some vague ideas, I hear here and there, but I haven't looked into deeply. So I guess I kind of like to get your ideas there and what you think of the old right and how it compares to our current state of the Republican Party or conservatism in general. And I guess your thoughts on the future of that.
Sure, I guess I would say I need a question to work with there, because unless you want me to just muse on the old right for a few minutes, I'm not sure where to start.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to compare the old right to the current state of the right.
Okay.
Yeah, and then kind of I guess probably start with what your thoughts on the old right generally, and then I guess we can go into comparing it to today. So,
sure. So I'd say the old right was really the politics of the industrial North. Where they favored industrialization internally, protectionist economic policies, an isolationist foreign policy, and they were very assimilationist. So they actually were very for pretty lax immigration policies to fuel all those factories they planned on making, and they were actually pretty hostile to expressions of nationalism by these foreigners. So you would have it where in New York. The old right, there are plenty of old right thinkers who were kind of shocked that, Irish Americans were displaying Irish Republican flags whenever there was a flare up in England, and they found that to be very troublesome. And now the American right today is sort of the opportunistic libertarians. Obviously, we have the neoconservative movement where the party, is happy to spend, untold billions of dollars on war, but then when their supporters actually want them to spend money on themselves, suddenly, we start hearing deficit hawkery, which never seems to matter. That's probably the thing that grinds at the sensibilities of most people that vote Republican today. I can't speak too much on the religious character of the old right. This is something I haven't thought too much about. But I mean, obviously, there's been now a shift since the 60s. You know, people on the left always talk about Nixon and his Southern strategy magically turning the right into racists. But there has been a new attempt to, or new, longer, for twice as long as I've been alive, right? A new emphasis on sort of religious rural Southerners, although that I think was really just a way of not talking about civil rights, right? I mean, the way that most people even in the modern day complain about anti-discrimination law is they talk about, religious exemptions, which is probably, the fact that religion has in fact become just a sort of polite way of getting around liberal mandates has probably done a significant amount of harm to religious institutions.
Cool. Now, I guess to tie into that, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are the possible uses of the Republican Party going forward. Because I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm more of the agorist bent, so I prefer people just generally don't vote and engage in political parties at all. But I understand people are going to, and if you're going to, I actually prefer people engage in that as opposed to the Libertarian Party. I'm of the opinion that I'd rather the Libertarian Party not exist at all. And if it's going to exist, maybe used for some sort of spoiler type thing strategically, but even then, I think it's kind of hard that you're gonna magically commandeer a party to be able to use effectively in that manner because you're trying to control a whole mob of people. But anyways, point being, I prefer people utilizing the Republican Party, but in a libertarian manner. Kind of being a say like the YALs type thing. Like I find that to be a better way to go. I find it. I feel like, I guess my thoughts, like if you feel like libertarianism, when they take over a party, it kind of muddies the philosophy. But if you're a small fish in a big pond, I feel like it's easier to remain isolated and kind of be this the kind of keep your philosophy a little bit more pure. Like say if we had I guess we actually do now, a Mises Caucus Republican or Mises Republican Caucus or some shit. Like I feel like it's easier to actually maintain your philosophy there than it may actually be in the long run in a Libertarian Party. But I guess I'm kind of rambling now, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on what the uses of a Republican Party going forward, and maybe we even can talk about your thoughts on the Republican Party. I've heard you speak on it before, but I don't think I heard you speak too much on the Republican Party and its uses for the future.
Yeah, so I think my view is simply that the Republican Party, if you're going to accomplish your political goals, the Republican Party is probably where it is going to happen. That said, understand the Republican Party is hostile towards helping you, like on every level, hostile to giving you what you want. Right? You shouldn't see it as like a vehicle. It is more of a, it's a wall, right? Between it, there's Ancapasan, and then there's a wall called like, the liberal consensus, and that's like the big wall around it. But even before you get to that, there's a huge wall called the RNC that is there, that is very hostile to, to anti-war movements, to any kind of localism, to any kind of populism or assertion of control over your local institutions. Not only do a lot of these people have like a sort of personal contempt, even as we see, people complain about critical race theory in their schools, we see that a lot of Republican politicians just desperately wish that these parents would just shut up, right? You see politicians that sort of run not even against CRT, but just they run against dumb things Democrats said about those parents. But then you see the kind of people they hire. It's like, oh, you're on message with them. And so the Republican Party can be a vehicle, but you have to understand that it's not your friend. It really does despise you.
Yeah. No, I agree. I guess my thoughts too, especially in this current environment. I feel like I understand the establishment of it is 100% against you. But I do see a groundswell of the Republican voters or people who consider themselves being Republican being in some regards a little bit more friendly to our ideas.
Oh yeah. You should almost see Republicans as being like cops.
Yeah.
Right? Where, if anybody, like, if you want to be protected from crimes, it's probably going to be a cop and not, the criminal. But you have to understand that the cop is a trigger man for an organization that steals from you on a regular basis. Right. So if you want to, I'm a big proponent of using third parties as just, a carrot, right? Of just dangling votes for the party to, what if we, what if we cut the budget by 50%? Then can we have your votes? And you're just looking at us like, I don't know, maybe. Right. I think that should be the sort of caricature of the relationship you should have with the Republican Party.
Yeah, and I kind of touched on it earlier. I guess my big critique of that is, while I do agree with it on its face, I do think the logistics of actually doing that is something else. To have an entity, a large entity, a party that you're going to strategically, here and there and do it right. I think it's kind of the idea of that you're going to centralize things and somehow be able to do it correctly. I guess I find that to be, because like, while it is great, there's that flip side that like, okay, well, we're gonna fuck with this Republican to get a little bit more of what we want, but who's to say that you don't someone goes off script and they do it in a fucking state like, say, in Florida, where you have DeSantis, and someone tried to fucking be like, well, we're gonna run a Republican candidate, and they go off script and don't do what the party at large wants or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, so I think the logistics
like
of controlling
who
yes tries to spoil it for DeSantis or some shit.
Oh, even after you made some kind of agreement or what have you.
Yeah, because it's like the idea that you're going to have this control over the party like that, and for one, that you're going to have this ultimate control, that you're going to be able to get each individual, state or county or whatever to bend to your will and do the smart thing. And then even then, on the flip side, that you're going to have the people at the top or whoever, they're going to make the correct decisions is to me a little bit of like, it's great. I think it'd be cool if they did, but it's one of those things where like, I doubt, so while that would be the ideal version of their Libertarian Party, I don't have that much trust in that an institution that's set up in that manner to be able to effectively do that. So
sure. I mean, it's going to be hard no matter what, right? I mean, we are a minority movement. That is to say, we are a minority of the public movement, and we don't really have any media apparatus that's for us. We don't have, there's no way when you are an ideological minority, right? That you're going, there's no easy path here. One way or another, you're going to have to be doing political trickery or some other kind of coercion, right? To get what you want. I mean, all politics is coercion, right? Yeah.
Well, I guess to kind of put it in a certain way, I see that as kind of almost like the middle path, to where you kind of like I feel like you're almost better off just completely not buying into it all, or if you're going to do it, straight up just be like, well, I'm going to work in the Republican Party and I'm going to do my best to. But now when you're like this in between thing, you're in this weird spot where you have no real political power aside from this, which even that's kind of hard to do in the first place, and it's almost like you might be just running in place almost, like it you know what I mean? So
yeah, I'm really I'm gonna say hostile, but I'm really like would advise anybody against like trying to infiltrate the party and do it that way, because all that's going to happen is you're going to join the local party, and say you have no federal aspirations at all. You just do your local thing. You're volunteering for some campaign. You're going to put in 2, 5, 10 years or whatever. But what's going to happen is at some point, some National Party activist is going to be like, as soon as you get even a little bit of influence, some actors from National Parties will be like, oh, this guy, he was at an event with like known neo-Confederate Llewellyn H. Rockwell and Thomas E. Woods, right? And then you're going to be politely asked to step down. Nobody's going to take your calls. You're not going to be able to, do anything with anybody. Like, there's going to put out a burn notice on you, and you'll have wasted 2, 5, 10 years of your life for what? Right? Just to be told at the final pass, like, sorry, but you are actually, you're actually a white supremacist, right? And the Republican Party, I don't know what anybody else thinks, but the Republican Party is like vigilantly on the hunt for people to like throw to the wolves as being racist, right? And and it might as well be a libertarian, right? It's got to be somebody. They're like cops with a ticket quota.
Yeah, I guess infiltrate would not be the word I would use, because I in no way I'm saying people should have this aspiration to take over the party or to take over their local party or whatever, but it just to be this influence that kind of moves the ball a little bit that way. And even then, I agree with you entirely that and this is kind of partially an argument for agorism, to where I think you're kind of, to some extent, even in the Republican Party, you're somewhat running in place. But I guess in my head, I kind of like the logic I'm working through. I feel like you're running in place a little bit less probably in the Republican Party. Say the YAL is probably the best example I can think of, because it's almost this group where they roughly are trying to like vaguely, liberty-ish people, and we'll support them and we're kind of help them out. And because they're this small group, they're able to stay a little bit more philosophically consistent-ish. than, you know, if they were this large group or if they were a whole party like the Libertarian Party. But because of this small group, they're able to kind of make moves on the fringes. And to ever think that they're ever going to make some huge difference, I think, is to be silly. But to make a minor difference is something, and you're kind of somewhat, you know, influencing the philosophy of the people there. And I do think it has its effects. I mean, to what extent, I don't fucking know. I'm just talking out my ass, just like anyone else. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure about influencing the philosophy of people there. I mean, yeah, that's certainly possible, and I would like to hope that even, you know, some of my friends who've, you know, gone on and kind of done Republican things, I know I've moved the needle for them on certain things, but even then, it's really more to get them not to make certain arguments, right? Like, yeah, I probably haven't had much success, all things, if I think about it, on making Republicans into better libertarians, but I've definitely gotten better, or I've definitely tried to help Republicans not make arguments that sort of validate left-wing principles or, you know, sell themselves out, you know, at the first opportunity. But even then, it's like an uphill struggle, as we say. And even, I think, another case example of what happens to you, even if somehow by some miracle you get yourself in charge. So, I mean, so Steve King, right? The guy from Iowa, he wasn't really a libertarian to my knowledge, but that was still a case of, you know, some guy who comes into office who actually represents his local, you know, the views of the people who he represents, and the Republican Party just mobilizes to just tank his candidacy. Or even Marjorie Taylor Greene, whose views are incredibly in line, like her actual views, the actual things she believes, are in line with the stated principles of the Republican Party, and certainly in line with the views of her electorate. And you saw Republicans collaborating, mainly Never Trumpers collaborating, to have her removed from her committee seats, right? I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like, you know, you go through all this trouble to get maybe one thing, right, from one office in one place, but you're going to see an active, deliberate attempt as soon as you're noticed, right? It only takes, you know, the RNC sending, you know, maybe just one guy to see what's going on, and then like two more guys to run a background check and find something or some reason, some stupid Facebook post you made, and then say, all right, you are, you know, you can, you know, they just hand you a revolver and close the door and say, do you want to kill yourself, or do you want to, like, what's it going to be?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I don't disagree. I guess we're kind of fiddling the margins, and no matter what we do, in my opinion, to some extent. So, I mean, this is partially why I'm kind of like, you're better off just kind of, I mean, maybe you can mess around with political things and make some difference here and there, maybe more so locally, but at the end of the day, you got to be somewhat realistic and realize you're fiddling in the margins if you're going to play the political game, especially as a huge philosophical minority. I guess a good example I would use is like to kind of get at what I was getting at is a lot of people know, follow my channel, I got out of the active duty military like less than a year ago, and I did 11 years, and I was an anarchist for a good period of the time, and it was just like I fucking hated it but it was like, you know, bills gotta get paid type deal. But like at the same time though, I did notice I never like, I wouldn't actively go out and look for people to debate or argue, but there'd be people who knew my thoughts and they'd talk to me, and I'd push them this way or the other. Like I had a buddy who was like a really, you know, Southern fella and was always about the fucking, you know, Civil War and this and that. And I would make the easy libertarian arguments, be like, yeah, they should have been able to secede. Like, why not? You know, like, and I'd be able to move the needle there. But at the end of the day, like, I know it wasn't like I made some huge dent in the military or whatever in these people there. But I had some sort of, you know, impact to some extent. And I mean, that's all really you can kind of hope for, you know. I mean, the idea that we're going to, you know, take over this behemoth is, I mean, really, this is a dying behemoth. I mean, maybe you'll disagree.
You're trapped in the belly of this horrible machine, and the machine is bleeding to death.
So we're just trying our best to make some sort of difference as it goes. And at the end of the day, I guess I'm far more concerned about me and my family's well-being. But at the end of the day, I do want to try to make a difference for other people on the way. And, you know, and that's kind of, I guess that's a good example to kind of get at what I was getting at there. And I mean, really, even the Libertarian Party, that's all you can really hope to do. I guess it's just a matter of which is more effective, and I don't know. That's up for debate. I'm not even really necessarily solid on which. I lean more towards the Republican Party being a little bit better. But yeah, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. But I think I've covered most of it. But if not,
I guess on that one, I would say like, yeah, that you can't, there is a way to get the Republican Party to do what you want. And I talked about this with Pete before, which is just, you know, on the broad level, just withholding your vote and radicalizing its base just to see, you know, just to see how desperate you can make them, Right. And I've talked about how, lately we've been seeing Republicans entertaining positions just to try to get people back on reservation, right? Entertaining positions that they never would have dreamed of discussing, 20 years ago. Right. People like Ron DeSantis. Although even then, you kind of see Republicans, just trying to make statements. Even I was talking about this even earlier today, right? National divorce, right? Republicans would have never used this phrase 20 years ago. And I have my serious misgivings about the phrase now because there's no follow through, right? Republicans say national divorce, and the fact that you have Republicans talking about secession, right? But they're doing it in this way that is demonstrably not threatening to anybody. And when they do it, it just causes libertarians and others to be like, wow, base, did you hear that, Ron DeSantis used the phrase national divorce? And it's like, okay, and then you shouldn't support him for doing that. You should just immediately be like, yeah, obviously he should. And you should be like making more demands, right? What liberals don't take yes for an answer, right? As soon as he says national divorce, you should be like jumping down his throat for using such a pussy ass way of saying it, right? You should be you should be finding just, sorry, you forgot to dot the I on the word national, right? Sorry, say it again, right? And more radically this time. You got to be like that. And people say, well, then then he's going to not like you. Like politicians already don't like you. You should not be thinking in the minds of like, I want politicians to like me, right?
Yeah.
What is that?
You brought up something there that actually brings up another question in mind. I think I just talked about on the Clint show the other day, but Clint from Liberty Lockdown, he had on a show recently, James Lindsay, and I think he had said this before in a tweet, but he said on his show as well. He's talking about that he doesn't necessarily want a secession, but he would like to see, and I guess we're kind of almost maybe seeing the beginnings of it, of certain states sort of grouping together and not necessarily seceding, but being like, hey, we'll kind of support each other and, be like, when the federal government has this mandate or that, they can be like, fuck you, we're not doing it. And it's like they're not necessarily formally leaving or formally seceding or even formally nullifying. They're just not doing it. And I'm kind of curious. I mean, when I first heard that, my first instinct was like, no, that's kind of this like, that's kind of gay. Like, I mean, just don't be a bitch. Go for secession. But the more I think about it, I'm kind of like, well, if you're in this situation to where you have these group of states who aren't doing what the federal government wants them to do, in what meaningful way is that really any different than secession or nullification if they are in effect doing the same thing? And there are definitely, obviously, as we've seen with the Civil War, some downsides to formally being like, fuck you, we're out. And I guess for me as an anarchist too, part of what I want people to do is to dispel the idea of, state power. And if you have this lower entity within a hierarchy of a state, basically being like, we're not doing that, to some extent that trickles down to where you're like, oh, so we can just say no? Like, but whereas a secession is more like, well, we're making two states now. Like it's a little bit different even in that philosophical sense, to whereas like a nullification, a soft nullification or a soft secession is in some senses almost kind of better in my head. Like if you can get to a state, we could get to a situation where a state or a group of states are just doing what they want, regardless of their federal government, and not necessarily breaking off. Like they don't feel the need to be like, make it this formal thing. In some senses, I almost see that as better because I mean, it's almost just like, no, we're not doing that. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know if that what your thoughts on, because that was something I thought about too, and it's kind of like made me think. I still go back and forth. It's an interesting question, I think.
So I guess my first thought was, so I don't know enough about the specifics of how this has gone down. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no way that these states are getting together and like, in one voice saying no to like signed acts of Congress or Supreme Court decisions. I always talk about how there is no Biden vaccine mandate, right? Mm-hmm. Biden just said that there's going to be a mandate at some point. It's bureaucracies making recommendations and then firms acting in advance of it. And so I guess I would say, what are these states getting together and standing up to? Because, the main source of the problem is that there are these bureaucracy, like there are bureaucracies at the federal level, and then also there are ways for the federal government to manipulate procedural outcomes and bureaucratic outcomes at the local level. So for a governor to say, I'm not going to do what the federal government wants me to do, what does that mean the federal government wants you to do, right? Are are you refusing federal government money here, or is that what's happening? What is the rebellion? What are you doing exactly? And so I guess I'll just say there, I don't even know what they're saying they're doing, and I'm not going to say it's bad. I don't think it's anything, right? If only because, to put it just mildly, because I'm only hearing it for the first time from you, right?
Yes.
Like if it was something that
was
were
a
actually
hypothetical. It's not something that's actually happening. It's a hypothetical, but yeah.
Like I would have heard screeching about this for weeks ago, right? If it was sort of like serious.
Yeah, no, yeah, but I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of curious, like how that. I mean, I get what you're getting at, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be a group of states. Even if it's just one state, even if DeSantis decided, I think the whole idea of what James Lindsay was getting at was the whole idea of the group of states was before that reason, that if the federal government decides to withhold money, that now let's be real, these are most likely going to be red states, and these are states that are a little bit more fiscally solvent than the other states. So they're in a better position to refuse federal money than other states are. To some extent. I'm not, you're more economics guy than I am.
I definitely don't
so
think that's true,
better.
right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Most red states are like net federal tax recipients. There's only like 8 states that pay more in federal taxes than they take in, and they're almost all like coastal liberal states. And a lot of them are using federal money to, close the gaps in their welfare schemes, right? So, even red states have urban populations that require either federal or state money just to get fed day to day. And so they need the federal money for that. And without that federal money, they'd be looking at some significant domestic unrest after, 9 meals, right? So I definitely wouldn't put too much faith in the fiscal solvency of red states. And actually, I mean, now that I think about it, the only example I can think of like a multi-state compact that we actually saw was Andrew Cuomo during early COVID, when they thought that, when the meme was that Trump wasn't doing enough to stop COVID. You saw Andrew Cuomo saying, the coronavirus doesn't respect state borders. It'll gladly go up I-95 or go up Amtrak. And so, New York's part of a regional compact with New Jersey and Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Massachusetts. And so it was actually a block of blue states then. And I was making the joke that, Andrew Cuomo was the foremost champion of states' rights. But even then, right, that was states' rights to do more than what the government wanted. And I haven't really seen, certainly in my lifetime, any significant amount of states' rights to do less than the government wants. And if such a thing existed, we know it would be said. And since it hasn't been said, I know it's not significant.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're like completely,
especially if just all the respect, especially if James Lindsay, right, is the one like, I'm for it. Like, oh, okay, so this is like worthless.
Yeah, no, I guess in my head I'm just theorizing which would be preferable of the two. A full break or an informal, we're just kind of not doing it. Obviously, I know there is an issue of like federal money. I mean, there's so many factors to this. It's just kind of I guess it's an interesting thought of which is preferable. Because I don't know. Because I do think in a philosophical sense, it's almost preferable to have, things basically be like, no, we're not doing it, and not be this formal, but we're going to break up and create a separate fucking, entity, like I don't know. There's something more to that. And it also kind of, in a sense, creates a little bit more of a return to, kind of states' rights, possibly. And if you have a group of states, maybe there could be some sort of legal way they can go about and like preventing, say the federal money thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a legal or fucking economic expert, so I don't know. It was a thought that I found to be interesting, because when I first heard Lindsay say it, I was like, yeah, I was turned off, because it just kind of seems like this like kind of bitch move. And then I thought about it more. I was like, I don't know, it might have some merits, but I don't know. Just it's kind of an unformed thought that I thought to bring up here. But yeah, I guess with that, we're at a good spot. I don't know if you want to go ahead and drop your plugs, and we'll.
Oh, sure. So if you want to hear more of my takes, so you can follow me on Twitter at Anarchy in Black. I also have a Substack, which is first initial last name .substack.com. That is to say MGAU.substack.com. That's really the two main places to reach me.
Awesome. And I appreciate you coming on.
And of course, I have a podcast. I forget about it sometimes. I have a podcast that updates, I don't know, at this rate, once every other month, called The Moral Minority. Our episodes tend to be about 2.5 hours long. Listen to it during your commute. It's myself and my friend Dan.
Yeah.
We're on Spotify, We're on Spreaker. We are on YouTube. I think we're on Apple Music. It shouldn't be too hard to find. There's actually 2 more minority podcasts on Spotify. Ours is the one with the shittier logo. It's like just an I voted pin.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I watched the most recent episode or listened to the most recent episode, and it was like I felt like I got portaled back like a year, but then it's like it's only been a couple months. It's just that the news cycle is so fucking insane now. They're like, oh, it's just the other month, like. But I don't know. It was funny. It's definitely interesting. I definitely highly suggest anyone to check it out. I definitely. I don't know who's your co-host. I'm not sure if I've heard him before. He was a funny guy. I liked him.
Yeah, I don't want to dox him, although I could be denying him exposure.
Don't give his full address and details.
Yeah, right. His name is Dan, and he's from Massachusetts. And if you want more details on him, I'm sure he gives away piece by piece where he's from on the show proper. We actually used to make the joke since sometimes we record episodes and then not. I would take forever to edit them, and they wouldn't come out for like a week and a half later. And then we would say, well, it doesn't matter because as a libertarian, we kind of just predict the future. So the things we talk about, all of our predictions will just come true. So by the time the episode comes out, it's just, it's current events.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know if the dude had more of an online presence and I just hadn't heard of him. I guess not. If he was
not really.
Dan. So if he's that much of
this from him later, he's going to be chewing me out, right when we're doing show prep. He's going to be like, Marcel, why didn't you plug, my stand-up comedy and, the place that I work?
Well, all right. With that, this is the No Way Jose show. I'm on the No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major audio podcatchers, Odyssey. My Twitter is @2020 No Way Jose. If you want to support me, patreon.com, just No Way Jose 2020. Like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. Appreciate you coming on, Marcel. This was fun.
Happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And with that, we're out. Boop, stick around. We can shoot the shit after and everything. But boop.